Supergirl's first real box office receipts are finally here. Not tracking, not vibes, not sources say, a real number. $7.8 million in domestic previews. Now, is that a catastrophic number by itself? No. And if somebody tells you that number alone proves the movie's dead, they may be putting the cart before the horse. But here's the problem. For a movie with a reported production budget of $170 million before marketing, for the second theatrical film in James Gunn's new DCU, for the first real test of whether Superman's goodwill could transfer to another character, $7.8 million is not a victory lap. It's a stress test. And the real story is not simply whether Supergirl opened high or low. The real story is that Warner Brothers acted like this movie needed the Superman safety net before the audience ever bought a ticket. They told you this was Supergirl's big moment, but the receipts say something else. The receipts say they didn't trust her. So today, I'm not doing I'll just call it the lazy version. I'm not going to do the Millie Alcock destroyed DC version of the story. I'm not doing the James Gunn is finished forever because YouTube has killed James Gunn more times this year than Jason Voorhees has been killed by teenagers with terrible judgment. We're looking at the numbers. 7.8 million in domestic previews. 13 million worldwide so far. $170 million production budget, a rotten critic score, a much softer audience reaction than DC needed, a movie with no post-credit scene that still ends by steering Kara right back towards Superman. And that is not just a box office story, that is a studio confidence story. And the receipts, they've been sitting in plain sight for months. So let's get into it. Hey everybody, Chris here, the Critical Nerd, and gotta say thank you to all the returning viewers. And if you're new here, welcome in, stick around, because around here we keep the expectations low, the receipts high, and we try very hard not to let Hollywood PR departments do our thinking for us. And yeah, I know I've talked about Supergirl a lot, talked about tracking, talked about the budget, talked about the break-even math, talked about the release window, talked about whether this movie can even win its own opening weekend. So why am I back here today? Because now the first actual number's in. And before this, the Supergirl story was built on projections, critic reactions, press tour spin, test screening chatter, and the usual online civil war where one side says the movie is perfect and the other side says civilization ended because a fictional alien woman wore a cape. Very serious people, very serious work. But now we have the first real receipts. The numbers list Supergirl at $7.8 million in domestic previews. International box office is listed at $5.2 million. Worldwide is listed at $13 million. And the production budget is listed at $170 million. That is the spine of today's video. Not emotion, not vibes, not my favorite YouTuber said it's over. The numbers. And the numbers do not say catastrophic collapse yet, but they absolutely do say this. Warner Brothers, they've got a reason to be nervous. Let's start with the preview number, $7.8 million. That is the kind of number where both sides are going to lie to you. The defenders are going to say, see, it's fine. It made almost $8 million in previews. Stop hating. And the doom crowd is going to say, 7.8, it's dead. Dig the hole, bring the Snyder shovel. We are burying the DCU. Now, neither one is the right read. 7.8 million in previews is not nothing. It's not a Blue Beetle level shrug. It's not a movie that opened to the sound of one guy in a theater coughing into a popcorn bucket. But it is also not a strong enough number to erase the concern, because the preview number is not the verdict. The preview number is the first smell coming out of the kitchen, and right now, the smell is not fresh baked blockbuster. It is more like somebody reheated the DC brand in the microwave and forgot to take off the plastic wrap. The issue is not just the number. The issue is the number against the budget. Supergirl is not some lean, scrappy, modestly priced character drama where 40 or 50 million domestic gets you a round of applause and a cupcake in the break room. This is a $170 million plus superhero film before marketing, before theater splits, before the part where the studio remembers that trailers cost money, posters cost money, international rollouts cost money, and flying actors around the world to say, this movie is really important to me, also costs money. So when a movie like this starts with 7.8 million in previews, the question is not, is that number embarrassing by itself? The question is, what kind of weekend does this need now to make the math look sane? And that is where the discomfort begins. Because even if the weekend lands in the $40 to $50 million domestic range that has been discussed in industry tracking, that does not make this a disaster overnight. But it also does not make it a healthy launch for a $170 million plus DCU movie. It makes it a movie that now needs legs. Serious legs. Not good word of mouth on Twitter legs. Not the fans who already saw it or defending it in the replies legs. Real theatrical legs. And I'm sorry, but when your superhero movie needs the legs of a Pixar sequel and the patience of a Christopher Nolan drama, that is not where the studio wants to be on Saturday morning. Now, this is where we need to talk about the number that always gets laundered through Hollywood PR. Break even. Because whenever a big movie opens soft, suddenly the public break-even number gets very polite. The studio never says, well, we spent too much money, the marketing campaign was expensive, theaters keep a major chunk of the gross, international revenue comes back at a lower rate, and the movie needs a much bigger worldwide number than the headline suggests. No. They say things like, we'll be happy with anything above 300 million worldwide. Now, that sounds reasonable. That sounds calm. That sounds like somebody wearing a nice suit on a trade call, trying very hard not to sweat through it. But here's the problem. 300 million worldwide is not the clean break-even number for a $170 million plus superhero movie. It might be the studio's internal, please don't make this look like a bloodbath number. It might be the, we can spin this as survivable number. It might be the, please don't call the new owner yet number. But it is not the real break-even math once you include marketing and theatrical splits. Studios do not keep every dollar at the box office. Theaters take their cut. Domestic returns are stronger, international returns are weaker. And a superhero movie with a global campaign does not magically market itself because somebody at Warner Brothers posted a cape emoji. So when the production budget alone is $170 million plus, the real target is much higher than the number people casually throw around online. Now, depending on the final marketing spend in the domestic versus international split, this movie likely needs several hundred million more than the polite PR number to look genuinely healthy. That does not mean Supergirl is dead after previews, but it does mean the path is, I'll just say, narrow. And that is the important part, because this is not a small film that can stumble at launch and still quietly become profitable. This is a DCU film number 2. This is the first real proof of transfer test. Can the goodwill from Superman move to Supergirl? Can the audience trust the DCU label enough to show up for a character who is not Clark Kent? Can Warner Brothers build a universe without every movie leaning back on the biggest shield in the room? That is the number that matters. Not just 7.8 million. The transfer number, the confidence number, the will the audience follow us to the next character number. And right now, that number's not giving Warner Brothers permission to relax. Now let's talk reviews, because the critic and audience split is not simple. Rotten Tomatoes currently has Supergirl sitting rotten with critics. As I'm recording this video, 57%. The verified audience score is better, and that matters. In fact, the audience is at 76%, because this is not a clean audience rejection. This is not one of those movies where critics shrug, audiences revolt, and everybody walks out looking like they just paid $18 to be insulted by a studio logo. The audience score says some people are enjoying this movie. And Millie Alcock in particular is getting a lot of the same response across the board. She's not the problem. That's important. because the lazy version of this video would blame the actress. The receipts, well, they do not support that. The receipts say something much more dangerous for Warner Brothers. The problem is not that people hate Millie Alcock. The problem is that the movie around her is not creating enough urgency. And that's worse. Because hate can be marketed. Controversy can be monetized. A fandom war can become free advertising. But a shrug? A shrug is death by indifference. And that is the danger zone Supergirl is sitting in. It is not that every critic thinks the movie's garbage. It is that too many reactions sound like some version of, Millie Alcock is good, the movie's fine, the character deserves better. That is not the reaction Warner Brothers needed. This was supposed to be the second theatrical pillar of the new DCU. The first real theatrical follow-up after Superman. The proof that James Gunn and Peter Safran have built more than one character. And instead, the conversation is already, well, at least she's good in it. That is what studios say when they are trying to salvage an actor from a movie that did not fully work. It is not unusually what they would say when they're launching a confident new franchise pillar. Now we get to the part of the story that matters most, because this weekend's number is not the beginning of the story. It is the receipt at the end of a story that appears to have been written in post-production. Supergirl was supposed to be Millie Alcock's movie, a cosmic road trip, a darker, harder, stranger version of Kara Zor-El inspired by Tom King and Bilquis Everly's Woman of Tomorrow comic. A revenge story, a grief story, a character story, not Superman 1.5. James Gunn chose this as the foundation for the DCU's second theatrical movie because of the strength of the script. That was the promise. Quality first, script first. No movie goes forward until the screenplay is ready. That was the brand promise of the new DC studios. And then came post-production. Now, got to be careful here. Some of the bigger claims floating around, 10 plus test screenings, multiple endings, major structural reshuffling, are based on reporting and chatter that should be treated as reporting, not studio confirmed fact. This channel is not going to turn rumors into stone tablets just because they help the argument. That is how you get ratioed by your own receipts. But there are confirmed and reported pieces that matter. The composer trail is real. Rahman Dawali, hope I pronounced that right, was attached. Then Tom Holkenborg was reported. Then Claudia Sarni became the final composer. That is 3 composer names attached to one movie in a very short window. Could there be a normal industry reason for that? Sure. But is that the kind of calm, stable post-production footprint you expect from a confident franchise pillar? Not exactly. Then there's the runtime. Reports from test screening comparisons say an earlier cut ran somewhere around 10 to 15 minutes longer than the final theatrical version. Other online reporting has claimed a larger reduction. Either way, the important point is not whether it was 15 minutes or 25. The important point is that scenes were removed, the movie was tightened, and the final version became leaner. Again, that could be normal. Movies change in post. That is not automatically scandal. But then we get to the part that actually supports the thesis. The final cut reportedly added more Superman. Yeah, it added more Superman. Games Radar covered test screening comparisons, saying earlier versions included material that did not make the final film, while the final cut added 2 more scenes featuring David Cornsweet's Superman. There's the receipt. Not Superman exists in the movie. Of course Superman can exist in the movie. They're cousins. That relationship matters. The receipt is that as the movie moved toward release, the final version appears to have pulled Kara closer to Superman, not farther away. And that is where the safety net starts to show. This is where the paper trail gets specific. If you fully trust Supergirl as a solo launch, you let the movie stand on Kara. You let the marketing stand on Kara. You let the ending stand on Kara. You let the audience leave the theater thinking, that was Supergirl's movie. Instead, the final conversation around this movie keeps coming back to Superman. Superman appears. The movie ends by bringing Kara back to Earth. Entertainment Weekly's interview with Craig Gillespie frames the ending as teeing Kara up for Man of Tomorrow, which by the way releases next year, 2027. People confirms there is no mid-credit or post-credit scene, but the movie itself ends with Kara and Krypto returning to Earth, with Superman part of that final positioning. So think about that. No post-credit scene, no little optional DCU Easter egg after the credits, no stay tuned for the next corporate invoice. The connective tissue is not hidden at the end, it is built into the actual ending. That is more revealing, because a post-credit scene is easy to dismiss. That is franchise housekeeping. Stay after the credits, get your little teaser, watch the guy in the row behind you explain Brainiac to his girlfriend, and then go home. But when the actual ending of the movie is doing the connective tissue work, that is not a tag, that is structure. And structurally, this movie ends by making sure Kara is pointed back towards Superman. And again, I'm not saying Superman should never appear. That would be stupid. And YouTube has a strict quota of stupid arguments per day, and I believe it was filled before breakfast. The issue is not that Superman exists. The issue is emphasis. The issue is confidence. The issue is that the second theatrical movie of the new DCU was supposed to expand the universe. Instead, it risks looking like the first test of how much Superman can be used to stabilize everything else. That there is the safety net. And the preview number makes the safety net look less like world building and more like insurance. Now here's where I'm going to push back on the comp set just a little bit. The obvious take this weekend is going to be, audiences rejected Supergirl. The DCU is already struggling. James Gunn cannot follow up Superman. The brand is cooked. The DCU is dead. Now, some of that, well, it may ultimately prove true, but that is not what the receipts show, at least right now. The receipts show something more specific. The people who went to see the movie do not appear to be universally rejecting it. The verified audience score is not great enough to call this a breakout crowd pleaser, but it's also not a total audience revolt. So the problem is not simply everyone saw Supergirl and hated it. The more dangerous problem is not enough people felt urgency to see Supergirl immediately. And that's just a little bit different. That means the villain of the story is not necessarily the audience. The villain may be the studio's own uncertainty. Because here's the theory grounded in the receipts. Warner Brothers spent the entire lead up trying to make audiences confident in Kara Zor-El by keeping Clark Kent close enough to catch her if she fell. That is not a creative sin by itself, but it is a confidence tell. You do not build a safety net unless somebody thinks the fall is possible. And once the studio shows that uncertainty, it bleeds into everything. The trailers, the interviews, the coverage, the tracking, the box office forecast, the casual moviegoer who says, I'll wait for streaming. That last one matters more than the angry fan, because the angry fan has still clicked on 5 videos and told everybody how angry he was. The casual moviegoer just stayed home. And that is what kills movies now. Not outrage, indifference. The studio did not need to convince the internet to argue about Supergirl. That part was easy. The studio needed to convince normal people that this was an urgent theatrical event. And if the first preview number is telling us anything, it is that the urgency did not fully transfer. Now, let's be very clear about this. This is not a Millie Alcock problem. If anything, the review pattern protects her. Even mixed or negative reactions often separate her from the movie's broader issues. The common thread is not she failed. The common thread is she deserved a stronger movie. That matters because Hollywood loves learning the simplest, dumbest lesson available. Movie underperforms, people hate the character. Movie overperforms, make 7 sequels and a serial. No. The lesson here is not automatically that audiences rejected Supergirl as a character. The lesson is that audiences were not urgently compelled by this version of this movie at this budget in this franchise context after years of DC trust erosion. Now, that is a mouthful, but it's also the truth. This is a trust problem. And I know we've used that phrase a lot on this channel because Hollywood keeps handing us the same receipt with a different logo at the top. But that is what this is. Does the audience trust DC enough to show up opening weekend for the next character? Does the audience trust Warner Brothers enough to treat this as essential? Does the audience trust the DCU label enough after Superman to say, Yes, I'm not waiting. I'm going now. 7.8 million previews does not answer all of that. But it starts answering it, and the answer is not one Warner Brothers wanted. Now, we need to zoom out here a little bit because this is not happening in a vacuum. The DCU is not just a creative project. It is a corporate asset. And right now, Warner Brothers is not just trying to launch movies. It is navigating ownership, leadership, merger pressure, franchise patience, and a very expensive cinematic universe that has to prove it can survive beyond Superman. That's why Supergirl matters. Not because one movie will kill the DCU overnight. Well, it won't. Supergirl is not going to walk into a boardroom, unplug the DCU server, and ask James Gunn to turn in his raccoon. But this movie does affect the patience window. Superman gave DC momentum. Supergirl was supposed to prove that momentum could transfer. That's the test. Not whether Superman can sell Superman tickets. Of course Superman can sell Superman tickets. He's Superman. The test was whether audiences would follow the DCU to the next character. The test was whether the DCU logo had gained enough trust to lift the next movie. And right now, that question's still open. But the early answer's uncomfortable. Because if Supergirl lands soft with a $170 million plus budget, mixed reviews, and a story that keeps folding Kara back towards Superman, Warner Brothers has to ask a very expensive question. How many characters can this universe actually launch without Superman standing nearby? That is not a fan war question. That's a business question. And it is the question every studio should be asking before they greenlight a cinematic universe like it's still 2012 and everybody has Avengers Afterglow. The audience is different now. The market is different. Streaming trained people to wait. Superhero fatigue is real, even if certain fanboys want to treat that phrase like a slur, and DC does not have unlimited margin for good enough. Good enough at $170 plus million is not good enough. This is why I keep coming back to the editing room, because if this movie had opened with a giant preview number, strong reviews, and clear audience heat, the Superman connection would look different. It would look like confident franchise building. It would look like smart universe construction. It would look like DC saying, here's Kara, here's Clark, here is the super family, come along for the ride. But with this preview number, with this budget, with this critic score, with this audience response, the Superman connection starts to look less like confidence and more like insurance. And that is the difference. The same story choice can read two completely different ways depending on the receipts around it. If the movie breaks out, Superman's presence looks like smart world building. If the movie struggles, Superman's presence looks like a studio quietly saying, please remember the part you liked. And that is just brutal. And that is why the phrase, they didn't trust her, works. Because it's not really about Millie Alcock. It's not even entirely about Kara. It's about the studio. The studio hired the actress. The studio chose the script. The studio built the release plan. The studio managed the post-production. The studio decided how much Superman to use. The studio decided how much this needed to connect to Man of Tomorrow. The studio decided how much of a safety net would be visible. And now the first number's in. 7.8 million. Not a collapse, but not a roar either. A warning. And warnings are usually more useful than disasters because by the time something is officially a disaster, everyone pretends they saw it coming. So what does 7.8 million actually mean? It means Supergirl's not dead yet. It means the full weekend still matters. It means Friday and Saturday walk-ups matter. It means the audience reaction has to translate into actual legs, not just online defenses. It means the Sunday estimate is going to be very important. And it means that if this movie opens soft, the Monday conversation will not be about whether Millie Alcock can act. It will be about whether the DCU can expand. That is the real story, because the job of Supergirl was not simply to exist. The job of Supergirl was to prove that Superman was not the whole engine. It had to prove the new DCU can move from the obvious character to the next character, from Clark to Kara, from launch to expansion, from goodwill to habit. And right now, the first receipt says that transfer is not automatic. That is the thing Warner Brothers should be worried about. Not one preview number in isolation, the transfer problem. the trust problem, the safety net problem. And if that sounds familiar, it's because this is the same problem Hollywood keeps creating for itself. It spends years damaging audience trust, then it spends hundreds of millions of dollars trying to buy that trust back with logos, cameos, brand names, and nostalgia. Then when the audience does not show up automatically, the industry acts shocked. But the audience is not shocked. The audience has been telling them for years. Brand recognition is not urgency. A shared universe is not a reason to leave the house. And a cameo is not a substitute for confidence in the movie whose name is on the poster. So let's bring this thing in for a landing, shall we? Supergirl did not collapse overnight. Anyone saying that from the preview number alone is, well, they're just getting a little bit ahead of the evidence, I'll say. But Supergirl's first box office receipt absolutely exposes the problem Warner Brothers was already trying to manage. 7.8 million in domestic previews, 13 million worldwide so far, a $170 million plus production budget, a Rotten Critics score, a better but not explosive verified audience score, a movie with no post-credit scene that still ends by steering Kara back towards Superman and Man of Tomorrow. That is the receipt stack. And that stack tells us one thing very clearly. Warner Brothers may have launched Supergirl this weekend, but they did not really let her stand alone. They built the safety net first, and now we get to find out whether the safety net works. Because Sunday is going to tell us a lot. Not everything, but a lot. It will tell us whether this is just a soft start with decent legs, or whether DC's second theatrical movie already needs the brand to start explaining why the numbers are not as bad as they look. But either way, the bigger point is already clear. This weekend's numbers are not the whole story. They are the receipt for a story that was already visible in the editing room. Warner Brothers said Supergirl could stand alone. The edit history said, add more Superman. One of those things is the truth. The receipts tell you which one. Millie Alcock, well, she deserved better. The character deserved better. And frankly, the DCU deserved better than a sophomore film that looks like it was quietly protected by a Superman safety net and released under someone else's name. Hollywood spin is most entertaining when the math walks into the room and ruins the party. And the math just walked in wearing a cape. And that's where I'll leave it. What do you guys think? Is Supergirl's $7.8 million preview number a decent start, a warning sign, or the first real crack in the new DCU? And do you think this was studio cowardice, genuine creative problem solving, or a little bit of both? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you're new here, do me a favor, hit subscribe, ring that notification bell, and join us as we keep watching the numbers, the spin, and the studio excuses very carefully, because the edge is not being first. The edge is having the receipts. I'm Chris, the Critical Nerd, and I'll see you in the next one.